Welcome to Panasonic Presents here at NAB 2019. We're joined here today with Patrick Alcerro, who is the LMU's Director of Broadcast and Video Production. That's a long title. So.
Yeah, it is a long title. I picked it myself.
So we met Patrick. Who did we meet you through? Through Steve Slade.
Yeah.
And you've dealt with Panasonic gear for quite some time.
Yeah, and we have.
So Patrick, why don't you just sort of give us a little bit about your background?
So I worked in industry through high school and then went to LMU for film and started working in the athletics department for production partway through college, and then stayed on and took a full-time job there handling all of their live stream and any over-the-top content that we create as a department.
And then what sports do you guys shoot?
We'll shoot anything for over-the-top content. We have 22 sports, from Olympic sports all the way through, baseball, basketball, your big money earners. But we stream basketball, soccer, baseball, and women's volleyball.
Okay. So talk a little bit about sort of the challenges for each sport, like what it brings, like basketball compared with like tennis.
Well, tennis, really, we just kind of put one camera out on each court, and they're static, they stay there, they're IP, and we kind of stream them as a big grid to YouTube, just kind of to meet some requirements, and also so that potential athletes or recruiters or parents can see people play. Versus for basketball, we'll have 4 cameras and graphics and audio announcers, replay, kind of the whole full production. 2 baseline cameras that are handheld, and then your game camera and your high-tight camera. All of those have to have at least a 20 by zoom lens on them. And then, yeah, I mean, it's a big show. And then for our in-conference men's games, we also have, we're televised, so either a truck from ESPN or Spectrum will come in, and we kind of shoot alongside them. And we still do the in-house feed, and they handle the external broadcaster stream.
Hey Dan, can you just run the clip? We shot some, or Patrick shot some footage from a game recently, and I got to shoot some behind the scenes of him with my GH5. So, as a sports shooter, what do you typically look for in a camera?
Typically, we're looking for, especially at the university level, we're looking for something that's easy to use, because we have students as our camera operators, and sometimes, if it's their first day and they're running late, I only have a few minutes to show them how to operate the camera, so that when I need them to change a setting or whatever, they're able to do that without me taking time out of my show in order to run them through it. You just have a good zoom lens, servo, be parfocal, has to do 60p or 60i depending on which venue we're in, and yeah, be pretty rugged, because again, students are not the most careful with products, so a nice rugged construction always helps.
And you were mentioning that in terms of shooting 4K, sometimes it's beneficial if you have a 1080, delivery, and you could reframe and.
Yeah, because again, students, and it may be earlier in their career, they're just learning how to operate. They may not be the most adept camera operators. It's very nice for us to have them record internally in 4K, and then we can still pull highlights from that and really crop into whatever shot we need in post when we're putting together our reel.
So let's talk a little bit about the CX350. So we'll let Patrick borrow a camera, and what was your overall first impression with the camera?
First impression, it's really easy to use. I opened it up and menus made sense, and I could change all the settings I needed to change, and even when we were shooting this kind of stuff, on the fly, I was going through and changing from 120 HD all the way to 64K and, different codecs, just to kind of see what I could, I wanted to give myself, because I was really testing with the camera, I wanted to give myself the opportunity to test all the different codecs and how they graded and held up to each other. The same thing here. One thing that doesn't matter so much when you're indoors in a gym, especially ours, which is a little on the dark side, is the LCD doesn't need to be all that bright, but out here on an overcast but still really bright day in Southern California, that LCD needs to be bright enough for you to see. I had no issues with it shooting out here.
So you were using the LCD over the viewfinder when you were outdoors?
Yes, yeah, the flip-out LCD on the side.
So in terms of format or codecs, what codecs do you typically shoot with?
I mean, it depends on the camera.
Yeah.
For some of our higher end stuff, we'll go into an external recorder and do ProRes HQ, or to save space, we'll use long op, especially for games. A 2-hour game file, and you've got 4 cameras recording, you're going to eat up hard drive space. Really nice to have a long op or more compressed codec.
This footage that we're looking right now, it's 120. You said?
Yeah, that's 120 in HD.
Okay.
Still looks pretty good on like a 65-inch TV.
Yeah, it's 85. Actually, it's
85?
an HD TV too. So talk a little bit about some of the features of the camera, like the lens, and one of the things that you brought up earlier with me when we spoke was just having the iris on the lens. A lot of the DSLR shooters, they're not used to having the 3 rings on a 20 times lens.
Yeah, I mean, having a 20 times zoom lens is always helpful, I think. If I could always shoot with a 20 times zoom and do cinema, I'd be happy. That'd be great for me. Never have to change another lens.
How about speak a little bit about the ergonomics?
Yeah.
Because you do shoot with DS or mirrorless cameras as well?
Yeah, we'll shoot with mirrorless, and then ergonomics. It's always nice to have that zoom rocker. Gives you the nice steady zoom all the way through the lens, and then parfocal. You can get get your focus in, zoom out, and get your shot again. Having that stepless iris is also really nice because sometimes you're shooting one way in a venue and the light looks really good, and then shooting the other way, it's just a half a stop or a third of a stop off. And really being able to dial in your iris is really nice. Our gym, and this is being fixed, we're replacing all the lighting in the gym, but one end of the gym is slightly magenta and the other end is slightly green, and one end is like a quarter stop or a third stop darker than the other side just because the bulbs are different ages.
Wow. So in terms of, I come from a cinema background, and the Super 35 sensor, full frame sensors, and a lot of nonfiction stuff. People are trying to get that sort of cinema look. As a sports shooter, like a 1-inch sensor, a lot of people, it's actually quite large for the type of camcorders that we used to use, which were typically 1/3 inch sensors. So how important is it for you to I guess not have a Super 35 sensor?
Yeah, in our live stream work and our kind of sports action or our live sports production, depth of field is almost a detriment to have a shallow depth of field because now you've got a guy running 100 feet straight at you as fast as he can, and you don't want to have your hypofocal distance is like 2 feet. He's going to run out of that really quickly unless you're really paying attention to what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But with that smaller sensor, having that deeper depth of field to play with, it makes it a lot easier for you to keep up when you're trying to focus on a moving target like that. Mm-hmm. And then in addition, like you said, it's a 1-inch sensor, which is bigger than kind of the standard.
It's the size of like a Super 16 film frame, so it's like...
Yeah, so that lets it perform a little bit better in low light. You can have those larger photo sites on it, which is always nice.
Yeah.
Because you can go into any gym and you'll still be able to expose your image properly without too much noise.
So I also wanted to ask you about what stop you usually shoot at. This camera has ND filters, so like for shooting, like when I was shooting my GH5 with some people, I just didn't have enough ND. So can you talk a little bit about just having that single body lens and built-in ND filters?
Yeah, I typically try to shoot around a 5.6 or an 8 in venue just to allow that depth of field to be a little bit deeper. Sometimes we have to go up to a 3.4 just because it was a little dark in there up until this new remodel. But typically a 5.6, and then being able to go outside is really nice to be able to switch over those NDs. Also, if the sun comes out, like when we do baseball, those baseball games will start at 6 p.m. and go all the way into the night until we had one game that went until midnight.
Yeah.
and that was, you have a huge lighting change in there. So to be able to just kind of roll out your NDs and continually change the stop on your cameras and do it really quickly, because you'll cut away to one camera and then the pitch is thrown. That operator only has 10 seconds to completely change the settings on their camera. Just to be able to roll out an ND and iris back down is really nice for them.
And the other thing about this camera, it has live capabilities in terms of either NDI or RTMP. So how would you typically set up a live shoot?
So most of our live shoots, we run all of our cameras back to a switcher through SDI. The cameras that we currently have don't have a remote, any sort of feature for me to change the settings remotely. Being able to do that through IP is a huge bonus to us. And then in addition to that, like you said, it'll actually stream out you can use it as an encoder, right, in RTMP. So that's great for some of our smaller sports where we're only going to put one camera out there anyway. Having a high quality camera, easy to use for our staff or students that are running it, and they only need one cable to connect to it other than power, or they could run it off a battery for 2 hours without any issue. It doesn't draw that much power. That's a huge bonus for us. Yeah.
And so you've shot with our EVA camera, and you've shot with GH5s. How does in terms of color, how does the CX350 match with those cameras, especially if you're working in with multiple cameras in the same sort of timeline?
Yeah, I think the color matches really well. The sensor technology is developed by the same team, and the color science is the same. It's not V-Log, but it's a very flat profile that you can get out of the camera. That's similar to V-Log, and it still maintains all the great, the saturated colors without being like oversaturated or kind of getting muddy. Skin tones are really nice, and the highlight roll-off is also really nice, which is something that I always look for in a camera. Like you can see the highlights on his neck from the sweat and stuff like that. They're brighter for sure, but they're not clipping, and there's no hard clip point, which is really nice. His shorts are like 3 stops over, so I wouldn't really use those as an example. But it has a really nice highlight roll off, and I think that if you're painting cameras on a live production, I think you can paint it to look like pretty much whatever you want. Same with the EVA, VariCam, and the GH5. So, I don't see any reason why you couldn't use these kind of interchangeably.
So what sort of applications would you use an EVA for or a GH5 for?
Well, concerts would be a good example of something where you might have a bunch of different cameras where you want a GH5 or something similar that you can kind of mount over like the drummer or something like that to get a nice top-down shot that's not intrusive. But, you may have somebody that has an EVA or a VariCam that is doing some handheld work or some gimbal work on stage, or another GH5, and then at the back of the room you may want to be able to have that long lens and not spend thousands of dollars on a lens. The 350 is a really good option to do those kind of wider and long lens shots for something like that, and just paint them all to look the same, and I think you got a pretty good looking show.
So talk to us a little bit about post. What is your workflow that you use for the university?
We use a combination of Adobe Suite and DaVinci Resolve. So editing in Premiere, and then sending an XML over to Resolve and grading in there. I tend not to use LUTs very often. Sometimes I use a color transform and then work from there. But usually I just grade from basically.
And your delivery is usually 1080 to the web?
Yeah, our delivery, I always create a 1080 version of whatever video it is, and then our video boards are like really funky dimensions in Venue, and that's just down to the manufacturer and what we decided to do a few years back.
What's the general turnaround time of like a game, and then that you have the
well, so for our games, our game recap goes out that night. I try to get it out within an hour of the end of the game. So we have a replay system. We export our melt out of there and combine it with an interview that we do post-game and send it out with a small graphics package on it. Feature videos could be anywhere from like a 2-hour turnaround to a 2-week turnaround, just depending on what kind of video it is. We have an awards show coming up at the end of the year. We'll start shooting that this week. We have to interview all of our seniors, and there's like 30 of them, so it's just a long process to do that.
Does anyone have any questions for Patrick? Or on the CX350?
So the long op, I believe, is 420, and then they have an all-eye codec up to 400 megabits per second, I think.
It actually has the same codecs as the EVA, so
Yeah.
it does do a long op 10-bit 422 150, and it has the all-eye 400. But for someone like you, I don't know if you would shoot 400 all-eye codecs.
I mean, it has its advantages, right? It's a little CPU. It's a little easier on the CPU because it's not having to do that interframe conversion, basically. But it does take up more hard drive space, so your data pull off your hard drive is a little different, and it will take longer to grade there. But the 420 looks really good. I shot something on the EVA and really pushed it in post and graded it. I didn't think it was going to hold up that well, but it was fine. I didn't have any issues with it. No noise. Yeah, it was fine.
Is the zoom the same on HD and 4K, or do you double up on HD?
It's a 20 times zoom, but are you talking about the intelligent zoom?
Well, no, you're asking if it crops the sensor when you go to 1080.
Oh, no.
No, I don't. Yeah, it's just a internal conversion. Yeah. I think you can, because you can do the. Isn't there a 2x digital zoom in it?
On the EVA, you can. I'm not sure about the CX350 actually.
Yeah. I didn't test that. I guess I didn't go through all the settings.
Neither
Yeah.
did I. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Patrick. Please, if you get a chance, go visit the other side of the booth. We have CX350s lined up. There's a behind-the-scenes little doc that we put together of Patrick shooting with the camera.